The death of Hulk Hogan on July 24, 2025, shook the wrestling world to its core. For decades, Hogan had been seen as larger than life, a man whose charisma, energy, and iconic persona carried professional wrestling into the mainstream. To fans, he was indestructible, a hero who could never truly fall. But behind the tributes and the sea of yellow and red, another story began to unfold, one that came not from reporters or anonymous sources, but from his own daughter, Brooke Hogan. What she revealed raised unsettling questions about whether her father's death was truly natural or the result of something far darker. According to police, Hogan went into cardiac arrest at his home in Clearwater, Florida. He was rushed to Morton Plant Hospital, but by 11:17 a.m., he was gone. The official report was clear. No signs of foul play, no suspicious activity, just the tragic end of a man whose body had endured decades of punishment. But Brooke wasn't convinced. She began leaking documents that suggested a cover-up, evidence of negligence, greed, and even intent. Her claims stunned the wrestling world. The documents centered on a $50 million lawsuit Hulk Hogan himself had filed years earlier. These weren't rumors or speculation, but actual legal filings that detailed how the medical system had systematically broken him down. In his later years, Hogan's body had deteriorated dramatically. Once billed at 6'7", he had lost nearly 3 inches of height from spinal compression. His legendary 24-inch pythons had withered. His bronzed tan had faded. But more than appearances, his strength, his mobility, and his health had been destroyed. Hogan himself admitted in interviews how much pain he lived in. He described struggling with even the simplest tasks. Something as routine as brushing his teeth left him unable to push himself off the counter. This was not the immortal Hulkster the public remembered. This was a man suffering, betrayed by the very doctors who promised to help him. Over just a decade, Hogan underwent 25 surgeries, 10 of them on his back. Brooke's documents showed that many of these procedures may never have been necessary. The most damning evidence came from his lawsuit against the Laser Spine Institute. Between 2009 and 2010, Hogan underwent 6 spinal procedures there. Medical experts later suggested these surgeries were not only ineffective, but deliberately unnecessary. The lawsuit claimed the institute prioritized profit over patient care. Doctors allegedly used scare tactics to dissuade Hogan from pursuing spinal fusion surgery, a more permanent solution, instead selling him on their own methods, which promised quick recovery but left his back even weaker. The results were devastating. Instead of relief, Hogan's condition worsened. His pain intensified, his mobility decreased, and ultimately, his career was robbed from him. More heartbreaking, these failures cost him the one match he had dreamed of for years, a WrestleMania showdown against John Cena. It was meant to be a symbolic passing of the torch, but Hogan admitted his body was simply too broken. For fans, that match was gone forever. The lawsuit claimed this wasn't natural wear and tear, but the result of conscious, profit-driven choices. Founder James Street Louis allegedly had financial conflicts of interest, profiting directly from Hogan's repeated procedures. Insurance companies were billed hundreds of thousands, while Hogan was left in worse shape each time. His damages were estimated at over $50 million. The case eventually settled out of court, reportedly for a massive sum, but no payout could undo the damage. By the time Hogan finally underwent spinal fusion surgery, it was too late. His dream farewell match was gone, his health permanently compromised. Brooke would later point to this as the true beginning of his downfall, not just physically, but emotionally. But the revelations didn't end with failed surgeries. Brooke also exposed how Hogan had been dangerously overprescribed opioids. Among them was fentanyl, one of the deadliest drugs on the market. Hogan admitted he didn't even realize he had been given it until he nearly overdosed. The doses were so high that pharmacists were shocked he had survived. The patches, the pills, the sheer volume of narcotics. It was enough to kill most people. Brooke argued this wasn't accidental. It was a system designed to exploit her father, keeping him in pain and dependent, while billing his insurance again and again. This raised a chilling question. Was Hogan's death simply natural decline, or the result of negligence, greed, and cover-ups? Brooke believed the answer was clear. As she continued releasing information, the narrative around Hogan's death grew darker. It wasn't only about medical malpractice anymore. It was about betrayal at every level. Those who claimed to care for him, she said, profited from his suffering while hiding the truth. Nick Hogan, who stood by his father during those painful final months, saw it firsthand. After major spinal surgery in May 2025, Hogan struggled with feeding tubes, breathing difficulties, and vocal cord damage. None of this was made public. Friends and colleagues like Jimmy Hart and Eric Bischoff assured fans he was phenomenal, painting a picture of karaoke nights and recovery. But Brooke argued this wasn't optimism, it was deception. Protecting the image of Hulk Hogan, the brand, mattered more than protecting Terry Bollea, the man. The official death report revealed the harsh truth. Renal failure, fluid overload, severe COPD, and cardiac arrest. Conditions that had been carefully hidden from the public. Conditions that could have been confronted if honesty had prevailed. Instead, the decline was hidden behind smoke and mirrors until the inevitable end. Brooke's most haunting revelation was personal. She admitted her own guilt in her father's downfall. She had been estranged from him for years, citing manipulation and abuse, and had chosen silence during his final struggles. In her own words, by supporting lawsuits and legal actions, she had paid into the very system that killed him. It wasn't a confession of causing his death directly, but an acknowledgement that she, too, had been part of the machinery that drained him of strength, dignity, and life. Her confession blurred the lines between victim and participant. Was she exposing the truth out of grief, or trying to absolve herself of guilt? Fans were left to wonder. Yet despite the betrayals, the failed surgeries, and the drug dependence, the world still remembered Hogan as larger than life. Tributes poured in from legends, celebrities, and fans who had grown up watching him slam giants, pose in the ring, and preach loyalty, prayers, and vitamins. But Brooke's words hung heavy over his legacy. What if his death wasn't just tragic, but avoidable? What if the hero who inspired millions had been destroyed not by time, but by greed? For fans, it was almost unbearable. To think the man who represented strength and loyalty had been denied both in his final years. For Brooke, it was the guilt of knowing his death was tied to betrayal. For Nick, it was the horror of seeing truth buried beneath lies until it was too late. The story of Hulk Hogan's final years may never be fully untangled, but what remains clear is that his legacy is forever stained by the pain and exploitation he endured. He lived as an icon, but died surrounded by silence, manipulation, and shadows. If you grew up watching him, the music, the slams, the poses, you know his impact was bigger than life itself. But these revelations force us to look deeper, to see the man behind the myth, and to ask what the cost of fame and betrayal truly is. Because sometimes, the darkest stories aren't the ones told in the ring, but the ones hidden behind it.